And so we're on it with Bible history. Remember, a whole Bible covering all the people, all the events in 11 periods of biblical history. And we've been through two of them already. The period of beginnings, which is Genesis 1 to 11, of creation, the fall, the flood, the Tower of Babel. And then last session, we finished the patriarchal period. That's the rest of Genesis, Genesis 12, all the way to the end of the book, chapter 50. And we said there were four leading people, the patriarchs. So it's the patriarchal period: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Everyone else is connected with them, like Abraham, his father, Terah, his wife, Sarah, his nephew, Lot, and so on. Everyone's connected. Now, of course, toward the end of the book of Genesis, there's trouble, there's famine. It seems like in the whole Middle East. And so there's trouble. As a result of this, the whole Jewish clan, that is Jacob and his sons, all 70 of them, end up down in Egypt. Well, during the life of Joseph, all goes well. They're cared for. They have their own territory in the land of Goshen, and everything is wonderful. And of course, they begin to multiply. Now, just a word about dates here. We're going to use round numbers, well, because they're easier for me and for you too to keep track of. We're going to put Abraham about 2000 BC. So roughly between the beginning of things and Abraham is a couple thousand years. You see how much time is covered in the scripture. And so when we come to the end of the book of Genesis, we're down in another period here. Now, the Exodus, you got all these Jews in Egypt, and we've got to get them out because really this is not where they belong. This is not the land that God gave to them. So the next book in the Bible is Exodus, and the third period of biblical history is labeled Exodus. Now, this is a very important one. Abraham, we said, is about 2000 BC. When we come to Exodus, it's 1500 BC. You say, what happened 500 years? Well, the first 100 is consumed with in the patriarchal period, but they are 430 years in the land of Egypt. So Abraham, 2000, leaving Egypt of 1500 BC. And our Bibles are open to the book of Exodus. And of course, the key person here, it says in the opening verses that Joseph has died. And of course, 400 years passed by. And the present Pharaoh knew nothing about Joseph, owed him nothing. He didn't interpret his dream. And Joseph is dead, of course, by this time. And so the Jews have become slaves in Egypt. Good help for free. And there was kind of a rumble, a strategy session in the palace. These Jews are really getting to be a lot of people, and if we're ever attacked in war, somebody comes to get us, these Jews may side with them, and we're in real trouble. We'll be wiped out. So chapter 1 is this edict from the king that all the baby boys are to be killed, the potential army. And but the Hebrew midwives, chapter 1, verse 15, these midwives uh, uh, feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. The government needs to be obeyed, but sometimes the government crosses the line and wants us to do something that is wrong, immoral. That's when we have to dig our heels in and say, we can't go along with that. And they couldn't go along with this. So they just did not kill the this big Planned Parenthood problem here. They're going to wipe them out and kill all the baby boys. No, they let them be alive. And when we come to chapter 2, we have that Moses is born and his mother will not kill him. She hid him at home for 3 months, then put him in a basket and waterproofed it, and put it in the reeds by the river. And Moses was spared. And, he gets into the palace at this point because Pharaoh's daughter is down for her ablutions in the Nile River and hears the cry of this baby and has him cared for. Amazingly, Miriam, his older sister, older sisters can be sometimes a pain in the neck, but sometimes very helpful. And here she was very helpful. And she said, shall I get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the child? So Moses' mother, who obeyed God, did not kill her baby, is now being paid out of the royal treasury to take care of her own child. Not a bad deal. Well, God does well with it. Well, Moses comes to years, of course, and he lives to be 120 years old, and very conveniently, his life is divided into 3 sections. The first 40 years of Moses' life, he's in the palace, becoming adept at government, at statecraft. Then there's a little incident, and he has to flee, and he's out into the Sinai Peninsula. And there he ends up tending the sheep of Jethro. And amazingly, as he's schooled in statecraft for the first 40 years, the next 40 years, he is learning how to live in the desert, in the Sinai Peninsula. Oh, my. God is preparing him. He's there 40 years. 80 years of preparation, but it's going to be a big task ahead of him. He's going to lead these Jews out. And so the next 40 years, he's leading these Jews in that wilderness where he had been tending sheep for the previous 40 years. Now, of course, Pharaoh just doesn't let the people go. There's a problem. And you come with, as I'm turning the pages here, over to the 7th chapter of the book of Exodus. And Pharaoh, who's unwilling to let the people go, is beset by these 10 plagues. We're going to number them, 10 plagues. Now, they were not just miserable experiences for the Egyptians, but each of these plagues was a blow to an Egyptian god. The Egyptians had about 2,000 gods. There was no secularism in Egypt. It was a religious country. And this religion to all these gods was pervasive. It touched every aspect of their lives. Now, not surprisingly, the first plague were in chapter 7, and it starts with verse 14 on this plague. It has to do with the Nile River. It's turned to blood. No wonder they worship the Nile River. It was their very source of life. If you fly in an airplane over the city of Cairo, over the Nile River that runs right through Cairo, it's an interesting sight. You see the river, and on each side of the river, a band of green stretches out there. And actually, that's where it's irrigated. But then the green stops. It's just like you drew a line on a map, and it's the brown sand of the desert. And so the rivers turned to blood. The Nile god was Hopi, Hopi. And so their god is disgraced in their presence and is no help to them at this time. Now we go to the second plague, which is in chapter 8, verse 6, plague number 2, underlined frogs, and the frogs were gods. All the animals were gods to these people. And so the frogs came up en masse, and it was frogs everything. Frogs in your kitchen, frogs in your bed, frogs all over the place. The second plague that came up. And then the third plague is also in chapter 8 and verse 17, the gnats, this almost invisible little creature that bites you and drives you crazy. And of course, it was a god also. And the fourth plague is in chapter 8 also, the flies. And you're underlining that. Verse 24, great swarms of flies. Oh my. And the fifth plague is in chapter 9. Each one of these was represented by a god. So each one is an assault on one of the Egyptian gods who's proven to be phony and powerless. Chapter 9, the sixth plague is boil. Verse 9. That's the sixth. I've never had a boil. I hope you haven't. I had an uncle, Uncle Ed. He would get boils on his neck. Very, very painful. And he'd get one, then he'd get another. Now, the seventh plague we come to is in chapter 9 also, and this has to do with the crops, verse 33. There's thunder and hail, and the crops are flattened and therefore incapable of being harvested. The eighth plague is in chapter 10, verse 4. Locusts who come in such swarms that and they just leave death and devastation behind them. And then the ninth plague, we're still in chapter 10 with this, is darkness, verse 22. So black. At night, it's not really dark, especially tomorrow in Chicago. There are too many lights. And when there's a full moon, you can see a shadow of yourself. But go in a windowless closet, shut the door, and you get some idea of the darkness that was upon the land. And of course, the sun was very important in the growth of the crops. The sun god was Ra. And so here's another assault upon a key Egyptian god. Oh my, darkness over the land. Now, the final plague, these last ones, of course, don't come on the Jews. They're just carefully selected for the Egyptians only. And when we come to chapter 12, we have the final plague, which is the killing of the firstborn of the people. The Jews were to escape the killing of the lamb. And this, of course, we find the word Passover in verse 11 of chapter 12. Every Jewish household was to kill a lamb, put the blood on the sides of the door and the lintel over the top. And God said, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. Now, there was a death in every household in Egypt that night. Either the death of the lamb in the Jewish household, or it was the death of the firstborn in the lowest family and in the palace and everybody in between. Can you imagine? One death is bad enough, but every family, every household, there is a death. And this, of course, is when Pharaoh relented and let them go out of the land. And so you've numbered these plagues. And we go on through the book of Exodus, and they leave with the people. And it is quite an exodus departure. 3 million people in 400 years. They had grown from 70, a big family, a clan, to a nation, really. 3 million people. They passed by a miracle through the Red Sea, and they're in the Sinai Peninsula. And coming through chapter 15, chapter 14, of course, is going through the Red Sea. And you get some liberals who come with some strange explanations for these miracles. That Moses had found a place where it was very shallow and ankle deep, and so they just walked through. Well, now you have to explain how the horses and chariots and soldiers of Pharaoh were drowned in that ankle-deep water. You make a fool of yourself trying to explain supernatural events. No, this was of God. There was a wall of water on each side. Pharaoh's army was wiped out. In chapter 15, there's a song of Moses and Miriam singing and praising God for all that he had done for the people. Well, now starts in chapter 16, something very unusual. This manna comes down from heaven. 6 days a week, none on the Sabbath day. They gather double on Friday for Saturday. And this manna keeps coming. What was it? Well, the word manna is a question. It's, what is it? They did not know. No one has ever figured out. Let the chemists go to work on this. This was the ultimate in excellent food for people, because with a rigorous life, it sustained them for 40 years in the wilderness. Read through the book of Exodus and keep reading, because in this period of the Exodus comes Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, all written by Moses. So next time, this is where we will pick up.